The empty pump. Here's something I've never been able to shake. And trust me, I've tried. It was Thanksgiving evening, and my girlfriend Kayla and I were driving out to her parents' place in rural Pennsylvania. Her whole extended family was gathering. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And this was my first time meeting most of them. I'd only met her mom and dad on 3 previous occasions, so the pressure was already sitting heavy on my chest. I'd rehearsed conversations in my head. I'd bought a decent bottle of wine. I was trying to be the kind of boyfriend her family would actually like. We had about an hour's drive ahead of us, winding through stretches of highway that gradually gave way to 2-lane back roads lined with bare November trees. Around 45 minutes into the trip, the low fuel warning light blinked on. Kayla spotted a gas station sign glowing faintly through the dusk on the right side of the highway and pointed to it. I pulled off without thinking much about it. The station was old, not charmingly old, just worn down, like it had been forgotten by the county and left to slowly rot at the edge of the road. There were 2 pumps under a canopy whose fluorescent bulb kept flickering. The building itself was a small square structure with windows that hadn't been cleaned in what looked like years. A hand-painted sign near the entrance said, "Open," but everything about the place gave off the feeling that it wasn't. I decided to pay with cash to save a few bucks on premium. I'd been hard on the engine lately and figured I'd give it a treat. I grabbed my wallet, pulled out 2 bills, and pushed through the door. The bell above the door didn't ring, the hinges creaked, and the inside of that station was completely, utterly empty. No cashier, no one stocking shelves, no sound of a TV or radio. The overhead lights buzzed with that particular fluorescent hum that feels too loud when nothing else is making noise. Behind the front counter, there was no door to a back room, just a wall. No employee break area, no storage, just a counter with an empty register sitting open, like someone had left mid-shift. I looked for a service bell. Nothing. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice came back to me flat and cold. The only other door in the building was the bathroom, and it was standing wide open. The light inside was off, and I could see nothing beyond the threshold. Just black. Something about the way that darkness sat in the open doorway bothered me more than I expected. I didn't look at it for too long. I backed out of the station and walked to the car, giving Kayla a helpless shrug through the windshield. She rolled down her window. "What's going on?" "Nobody's in there," I said. I figured maybe the cashier had stepped outside for some air or a cigarette. I walked around the perimeter of the property, hands in my coat pockets. There was no one near the pumps, no one near the air machine, no one sitting on a step out back. The rear of the building was a narrow strip of broken asphalt that ended at a line of trees. A single dumpster sat under a rusted metal roof overhang, and a dim yellow work light mounted above it barely reached the tree line. Beyond that, the woods started. Bare trunks going back into total darkness. I turned to head back to the car. That's when I heard it. "Hey." A voice, low, urgent, almost whispering but projected outward, like someone trying to get your attention without making too much noise, coming from the trees. "Hey, hey!" My heart didn't skip a beat. It stopped entirely for a second, then kicked back to life twice as fast. I stood frozen for half a second, then pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. I kept telling myself it was probably just some local guy who'd wandered off the road. Someone who needed help. Someone harmless. But my body already knew it wasn't, because my hand was shaking as I raised the phone toward the tree line. The beam cut through the dark between the trunks, and there, maybe 30 feet into the woods, a figure stepped halfway behind a tree, just barely visible, not moving toward me, not calling out again. just there, watching. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted back to the car, yanked the door open, dropped into the seat, and told Kayla, "We're leaving right now." She didn't argue. She could see it on my face. I pulled back onto the highway with my hands white on the wheel and my foot heavier than it should have been. Kayla kept her eyes on the side mirrors the whole way to the next exit. We found another station 4 miles down the road. Normal place, bright lights, warm inside. A teenager behind the counter scrolling his phone. I paid for $30 of fuel and tried to slow my heartbeat back down to something normal. A van pulled up behind me at the pump while I was filling up. A man climbed out wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't go inside. He didn't check his own pump. He just stood there, staring at me. I kept my eyes on the numbers ticking up on the display. When I finally looked over, he'd been staring for a solid 20 seconds without blinking, without shifting. I asked him directly, "Something I can help you with?" He turned away, didn't say a word, got back in his van. I finished filling up, got in the car, and didn't feel safe again until we were 3 miles away. We made it to Kayla's parents' house without any further trouble. Her family was warm and welcoming. I drank the wine I'd brought and smiled through the meal and tried not to think about what I'd seen in those woods. But then, a few weeks later, I was scrolling through local news out of habit, and I found it. A 34-year-old man who worked as the sole attendant at a small gas station just off the highway in rural Pennsylvania had been killed. His body had been found in the woods behind the property. The case was being investigated as a homicide. I stared at the screen for a long time. I called the police that afternoon. I told them about the figure in the woods, the van, the man who'd stared at me. I gave them every detail I could remember. They took down my account. I don't know what came of it. The following Thanksgiving, almost exactly a year later, a similar incident was reported at a gas station less than 40 miles away. Another attendant, another set of woods, another case that went unsolved. My friends have started calling whoever is responsible the Thanksgiving killer. He still hasn't been caught. I don't stop at stations I don't recognize after dark anymore. And every year when November comes around, I feel it. That same dread, sitting in my chest like a stone. He's still out there. Total section word count, approximately 1,000 words, expanding with full atmosphere below. Let me tell you what that drive back felt like in detail, because I think it matters. After we left that second gas station, neither Kayla nor I spoke for maybe 10 minutes. The radio was on low, playing something soft and forgettable, but I couldn't tell you what it was. My mind kept replaying the moment my flashlight had landed on that figure between the trees. The way they'd stepped back, not run, not fled, just shifted, like someone used to not being seen making a minor adjustment. Like they'd done this before. Kayla finally broke the silence. "Who do you think it was?" "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. But I had a feeling. The kind you can't justify rationally, but that lives in your gut. That whoever it was had been there when we pulled in. Maybe already in those woods. Maybe watching the station. Maybe waiting for exactly what had happened. Someone who would get out of their car, walk to the back of the building, and end up alone in the dark. What would have happened if I'd walked further into that parking lot? If I'd called out toward the tree line instead of running? I don't let myself finish that thought. What I do know is this. When I found that news article weeks later, the details matched everything about that station. The location, the layout, the single attendant, the woods behind the building, the fact that no one else would have had reason to be out there at that hour. Whoever I heard in those trees had been there before and after the employee was killed. The timing, based on what investigators later suggested, placed the death within a window that overlapped with our stop. We were there. We pulled into that station, and someone in those woods called out to us from the dark. The man in the van at the second station, I gave his description to the police too. Medium height, dark cap, didn't speak. Didn't seem interested in fuel, just in watching me. I can't say if he was involved, but the universe of coincidences keeps shrinking the more I think about it. The Thanksgiving killer, if that's what he is, has a pattern. Rural highway stations, holiday weekends when traffic is high, but individual stops are isolated, victims who are alone. He has never been identified, never been charged. He could be anywhere. And every year when the calendar flips to late November, I find myself checking the local crime feeds before we drive anywhere, just to make sure the coast is clear. The man at the store. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a small person, and I am not easily rattled. I grew up in a rough neighborhood in Cleveland. I've been in situations. I've handled myself. But what happened to me on Black Friday at a big box retail store shook me in a way that took weeks to settle. It was Black Friday. My brothers, Danny and Marcus, had been hyping this trip for 2 weeks. We were going video game shopping. One stop, in and out, get what we need. The store we went to was absolutely packed. I mean, shoulder to shoulder, cart bumping into cart. Employees with dead eyes trying to manage checkout lines that wrapped around entire departments. The usual chaos. You know what Black Friday at a store like that is like. It's a specific kind of American insanity that somehow still surprises you every single year. We rode the escalator up to the second floor where the electronics section was. Danny was hunting for a basketball game he'd been eyeing since September. Marcus wanted something in the action-adventure category. I was after the latest military shooter, the kind of game I could sink 100 hours into over winter break without feeling bad about it. The section was mobbed. People reaching over each other. Store employees barely visible through the crowd. I was flipping through a display rack on my own, a few feet from my brothers, when someone stepped into my peripheral vision and stopped. I didn't look up right away. People do that. Pause near you, read the packaging on something, drift away. Normal retail behavior. But then he spoke. "You like video games, huh?" I looked over. He was an older man, heavyset, wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt and jeans that didn't quite fit. His hair was greasy. He smelled like he hadn't showered in several days. And on top of that, something else. Something sharp and sour I couldn't immediately place. "Yeah," I said. Just the one word. I shifted a step to the left, a deliberate and obvious movement. The kind of body language that says I'm not looking for conversation. He didn't pick up on it. "My son loves games," he said. "He's around your age, actually. Real lonely kid." He smiled, and the smile was the most unsettling part. It lingered too long, and it didn't touch his eyes at all. "You should come over sometime, play with him. He'd really appreciate the company." I felt something cold move through me. "Sorry," I said, keeping my voice completely flat. "I'm not from this area." I didn't give him a chance to respond. I turned away, called Marcus's name out loud across the aisle, and started walking toward the sound of my own voice. Casual. Like I'd just remembered something. Like this man didn't exist. I glanced back once. He was still standing exactly where I'd left him, watching me walk away. Not moving, not reaching for a product, just watching. I found my brothers, stayed between them, and told myself it was fine. Weird guy, Probably harmless. The world has weird guys in it. You give them nothing and move on. We eventually found what we were looking for and got in line. The checkout lines were genuinely brutal. Easily 15 minutes, maybe more. So I broke off to check out a clearance rack near the back of the floor. Jeans, t-shirts, some flannel stuff. Discounted enough to be worth a look. I moved through a few racks, drifting toward a corner of the floor that was noticeably quieter than the rest. Fewer people. Less noise. I was pulling a shirt off a hanger to check the size when someone grabbed my arm. Hard. From behind. I turned around already saying, "What the?" Thinking it was Marcus. Thinking it was a joke. It was the man from the electronics section. I yelled. I don't know exactly what I said. Something like, "Get off me, I don't know you." Loud enough that people in the surrounding aisles turned to look. A few employees craned their necks over. Nobody moved toward me. Nobody came running. A few people just stared, the way crowds do when something alarming is happening and they don't know whose responsibility it is to intervene. The man released my arm and walked away without a word. No explanation, no apology. He just turned and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there catching my breath for a moment, heart pounding, telling myself I was okay and that he was gone. Then I went and found my brothers. I didn't tell them what happened. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because I didn't want to alarm them over something I couldn't fully explain. Maybe because the story, told out loud, felt like it would sound like less than it was. But they noticed. Danny asked me twice if I was all right. I told him I was tired. We paid for our games and headed for the exit. We came out through the main entrance into the parking lot, and my brother's car was parked maybe 100 feet from the front of the building. We walked to it. I climbed in the passenger seat. Then I looked back. He was there, seated on the bench just outside the entrance, facing the parking lot, facing us. His head tracked us as we moved to the car. His head tracked us as we began backing out of the space. As we drove down the lane toward the exit, I got one long last look at him through the rear window, and his head slowly, steadily rotated to follow the car, like a camera mounted on a swivel. I gave him the finger. He didn't react. I've thought about him many times since then. What he wanted. What he was planning in that quiet corner of the store. What might have happened if I'd been slower to react, or if no one had been around to look over at the commotion. I don't have answers. I just have the memory of that smile, and the way he watched the car until we turned out of the lot, and I couldn't see him anymore. Some people don't belong in crowded places. Not because they're antisocial, but because crowds are how they hunt. The passenger. I want to start this one by saying that I know exactly how it sounds. I've told this story before, and I've seen the reaction. Why would you do that? And yeah, in hindsight, I know. But at the time, in the moment, the decision felt human. It felt like the right thing to do. It was Black Friday 2013, and I was one of those people who actually gets up at 3 in the morning to go shopping. Don't judge me. A home improvement store in my area was opening early with major discounts on Christmas decorations, and I had my eye on a 9-foot artificial tree that was originally listed at $200. Half off. $100 for a 9-foot tree. I was going. I got there right at opening time, 3 a.m., and the lot was nearly empty. Maybe a handful of cars scattered across a massive stretch of asphalt. I half expected a crowd, but apparently everyone else was at the electronics stores or the mall. I found the tree without much trouble. The box was enormous, and one of the night shift employees helped me haul it to checkout and then out to my car. I tipped him, and he thanked me and went back inside, and I was loading it into the back of my SUV alone, in a quiet, almost empty parking lot, in the middle of the night. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and was about to pull out when someone knocked on my window. I startled, genuinely startled, and then rolled the window down. He was in his mid-20s, wearing a dark beanie pulled down low. Tall. He leaned into the window space slightly as he talked, which put his face close to mine. He asked if I had any change. I checked the center console and it was empty. I usually keep quarters in there, but I'd cleaned it out. I told him honestly that I didn't have anything loose. He nodded slowly, then asked if I could give him a ride to the nearest gas station. Here's the thing. It was 3 a.m. He was standing alone in a parking lot. I didn't know this neighborhood that well in the dark. And my gut, which I should have listened to, sent up a small, quiet signal that felt a lot like warning. I let him in. I can't fully explain why. Some combination of trying to be decent, not wanting to make him feel like a threat when maybe he wasn't, not wanting to be the kind of person who drives away from someone who just needs a ride somewhere ordinary. I unlocked the door. He got in. He did not say, "Thank you." That was the first thing I noticed. Not a small thing. I'd just let a stranger into my car in an empty parking lot at 3 a.m., and he couldn't manage a thank you. I pushed the thought aside and asked if he knew of any gas stations nearby. He said, "Nah, just that." Nah. I started driving. A few minutes passed in silence. I asked him why he needed to get to a gas station specifically. He didn't answer. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me over the engine or the heat fan. I asked again. Nothing. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield, not at me. Or at least, not when I was looking at him. But whenever I glanced forward and watched from the corner of my eye, I could feel his head turn slightly toward me. At every stop sign, at every turn, that slow, deliberate attention that doesn't feel like curiosity, that feels like calculation. I started sweating. This was a bad situation. I knew it now with complete certainty. The kind of certainty that arrives too late, but at least arrives. I was driving a man I didn't know through empty streets at 3 a.m. on Black Friday, and he wasn't talking to me. But he was watching me, and there was no gas station anywhere in sight. Every block we passed, I told myself, the next street will have one. And the next street didn't. And then the one after that didn't either. Then a red light, and through the intersection, maybe 300 feet ahead, a gas station, still open, lit up. I could see the pumps and the lit sign, and I felt relief move through me like cold water. The light took forever. I sat at that red, not looking at him, both hands on the wheel, watching the light and telling myself, 30 more seconds, 20, 10. I finally looked at him. I needed to do something to break the pressure of that silence, so I asked him, voice as even as I could make it, "You doing okay?" He turned his head and looked at me with an expression I cannot fully describe. Flat. Empty. Like looking at something that was not entirely present in the way people normally are. He gave one barely perceptible nod. The light turned green. I pulled into the gas station and barely had the car in park before he opened the door and stepped out. He stood on the sidewalk beside the curb and watched me as I pulled back out into the street. He didn't go inside. He didn't walk to a pump. He just stood there and watched. I laughed out loud when I turned the corner. It was that release of tension that comes out wrong, high-pitched and strange. I'd made it. Then I reached down to check my phone and it wasn't there. I checked the cup holder, the center console, both seat pockets, the floor. I pulled over under a streetlight and checked the back seat. Nothing. My phone had been sitting in the cup holder the entire drive. I knew that with complete certainty. I'd set it there when I got in. I drove back to the gas station. He was gone. The parking lot was empty. There was no trace of him. I went home. I confirmed the phone was not in the house. I had my laptop open and considered tracking it through my account. But I remembered I'd turned location sharing off months ago. There was nothing I could do. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed thinking about the fact that my phone contained my home address, my email, my contacts, my banking apps. Our Thanksgiving dinner was delayed 2 days because of a family situation. When I finally got home afterward, the front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. I pushed it open. The inside of my house looked like someone had been searching it methodically. Not randomly tossed, searched. Drawers pulled out and left on the floor. Closet doors open. Couch cushions moved. I called the police using my neighbor's landline. They came, took prints, found them on multiple surfaces throughout the house. The prints didn't match anyone in the database. He'd never been caught before. And he planned well enough that he still hasn't been. I've since changed every lock in the house, switched banks and moved. But here's what I can't shake. He never said thank you. Not once. And the whole time he was in my car, he wasn't thinking about gas stations at all. He was thinking about me. The closet. This is the one that changed things permanently in my house, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. Because I want you to understand that this wasn't a ghost story, wasn't a prank gone wrong, wasn't something that could be explained by any reasonable misunderstanding. This was a violation. It was Thanksgiving. We'd had a full house. My immediate family, some cousins, 2 sets of in-laws, and our next-door neighbors, Ray and Carol, who, have been close friends for over a decade. Ray and Carol don't have a large family of their own, so we've always included them in holiday gatherings. They'd been coming over for Thanksgiving for years. We watched the game together, eat too much, and usually end up talking until well past midnight. Carol and Ray had a son, Derek, who was 20 at the time. He'd been with us for the early part of the evening, dinner, dessert, the first quarter of the game. But then he'd excused himself. Ray told me later that Derek had gone home to watch movies alone and decompress. Ray joked, and I remember this joke specifically because of what came later, that Derek was probably just going home to look at stuff on his laptop. I laughed at the time. I have 2 daughters. My eldest, Simone, was 16. My younger daughter, Brooke, was 13. About halfway through the game, I noticed Brooke wasn't in the living room anymore. I assumed she'd gone upstairs to her room. She'd never been much of a football fan. During halftime, I went up to check on her, to see if she wanted to come back down and hang out. She was in her room, settled in with headphones, and she barely looked up when I knocked. I told her the game was starting back up, and she said she'd think about it. I went back downstairs. But as I was heading down, I happened to glance at the window at the end of the hallway, the window that looked out to the street. And the light was on in Brooke's room behind me, which meant that from outside, you could see into her room clearly. And as I passed the doorway of her room on my way back down, I noticed, almost without registering it consciously, that there was a shadow at her window. I stopped. I turned back. Someone was standing at Brooke's window. Not Brooke. She was on her bed with her headphones on, facing away from the window. Someone else. A figure. Standing close enough to the glass to be visible from the hallway angle, and standing still enough to have been there for more than a moment. I didn't call out. Something told me not to. I went back downstairs quickly and quietly. I went to Brooke and told her calmly to come downstairs. She heard the tone in my voice and didn't argue. We went down together. In the living room, I waited for a break in conversation and then asked the room, as casually as I could, if anyone had been upstairs recently, if anyone had gone to check on Brooke or used the bathroom up there, or had any reason to have been near her room. Everyone said no. Ray said Derek had gone home, but someone had been standing at my daughter's window. I excused myself again and went back upstairs alone. This time, I moved quickly. I pushed open Brooke's door and turned on the overhead light and scanned the room. Nothing. I checked under the bed. Nothing. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. The sliding closet door. It was a double-panel slider, both sides usually closed or fully open. Right now, one panel was shifted about 4 inches off center. I hadn't left it that way. Brooke hadn't been in the room long enough to go to the closet. I stood still in the middle of the room and stared at that 4-inch gap and tried to talk myself into moving toward it. My brain was doing what brains do, generating explanations. It settled naturally. It's an old track. You bumped it earlier and didn't notice. But I knew. Something in me already knew. I heard a sound from inside the closet, the quietest possible sound, like someone shifting their weight. I screamed. I'm not going to dress that up. I screamed once, loud, and immediately was embarrassed about it. Brooke came running up from downstairs, and I heard everyone else behind her. I crossed the room in 2 steps and yanked the closet door all the way open. Derek was inside. Ray's son, 20 years old, standing in my 13-year-old daughter's closet, pressed against the back wall, holding items that belonged to her. I won't describe what items. You can fill in what you need to understand the severity of what this was. I grabbed him by the front of his shirt. Ray came into the room behind me and stopped dead when he saw what was happening. He saw his son. He saw his son's face. He saw what Derek was holding. The evening ended. The police were called. Carol was in tears in the hallway. Ray couldn't speak. Brooke was safe. She didn't know what had happened until I explained it to her the next day, carefully, trying not to communicate the full weight of what it had meant. What it could have meant, that this person had been in her room, in her closet, while she had her headphones on and her back to the door. Derek had left the dinner, gone home briefly, and then let himself back in through the side door, a door we didn't keep locked during parties because people were coming and going. He had gone upstairs. He had gone into Brooke's room, and he had waited. My friendship with Ray and Carol is over. That chapter of our lives is closed. I don't think they're bad people. I think they raised a son who made choices that no parent anticipates and no family ever fully recovers from. What I know now that I didn't know then, predators don't always come from outside. They come from the dinner table. They come from people your children already know and trust. They come in on holidays when you're distracted and the house is full and no one is watching the staircase. Lock your doors. Know who's in your house. Check on your kids. And if something feels wrong, if a shadow shouldn't be there, if a door is shifted just slightly from where you left it, don't talk yourself out of it. Trust what you feel. Because the alternative, the thing I almost didn't do, is to keep walking down the stairs and assume you imagined it. I almost assumed I imagined it. I'm so glad I didn't.